Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Charity Charge Show. I'm your host, Stephen Garton. Today, we have an extremely special guest, Pamela Davis, who is the founder and CEO of the Nonprofit Insurance Alliance. Pamela, thank you so much for being on this episode.
Thanks for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a long time coming because I've been a fan of your work and really inspired by what you're doing. It wasn't until probably a couple of years into Charity Charge that I realized there were other really cool people out there that saw pain points and challenges that nonprofits were facing and then figured out how to bring that to them. So let us know a little bit about the Nonprofit Insurance Alliance and the work that you do.
Sure. Well, we're a group of C3 ourselves, one C3 nonprofit insurers. We have actually two main organizations. One's called Nonprofits Insurance Alliance of California, and it is insuring organizations, nonprofits, 501c3 nonprofits in California. It insures about 12,000 in California right now. And then the other main insurer is also 501c3 nonprofit, but it is a risk retention group. And it insures about 13 to 14,000 organizations in about 32 other states. We're about 35 years old. We've grown from very humble beginnings to now we have as a group of the two organizations about $1 billion in assets.
That's amazing. And when I look on your website, it seems that you're serving over 27,000 nonprofits. Is that
That's
correct?
about the number. Yeah, it's a 26, 27. Yes.
Got it. What I think is so fundamental about what you're doing is that all nonprofits need insurance. However, even what we do, I mean, we we have a really simple product and a simple mission. At Charity Charge, our main product is a credit card for organizations. But the reason that we're doing it is because we just heard from nonprofit after nonprofit after nonprofit have a pain point with the underwriting from traditional banks, right? And so it sounds like what you've been able to do is recognize a gap and try to create transparency, better pricing, better programs for nonprofits. So, with that being said, I always love to talk about the inspiration. How did this idea come to you?
I often say, be careful what you write your graduate thesis on because it will
Okay.
become your life. So let me kind of explain that. I actually didn't finish college at the normal age, and I went back as a returning student in my 30s. And then I went on, after graduating, went on to UC Berkeley to the public policy program. And as part of that master's degree, you had to actually write a thesis for an actual client. And at the time that I was doing it, the insurance industry was having one of its meltdowns, and nonprofits could not get insurance. They had had insurance a few years before, and then all of a sudden they fell out of favor with nonprofits, with insurance companies. And what I discovered is that the insurance industry is cyclical and that it changes its appetite regularly. But insurance is kind of like electricity. You've got to have it all the time. You can't just have it some years and not others. So I wrote this graduate thesis. The California Community Foundation and the Conrad Hilton Foundation funded my thesis, and it was very modest funding, but it was enough for me to, as a struggling student, to be able to do the work over a course of several months to write the thesis. And to my great surprise, they liked it so much that they published 5,000 copies in an occasional paper series. And so I often say that I became an overnight expert. And I knew so little, but I was also working at the time with the California Association of Nonprofits. And they said, we really think that this is important, that you've identified this issue that nonprofits need to have their own insurance company for long-term consistency because the insurance industry is really inconsistent in its willingness to provide the coverage. So if you want to raise your own money, we'll be your fiscal agent. And so that's what I said about doing, is raising funds to be able to create first the organization in California, and then actually subsequently in 2000, that was in 1989. In 2000, received grants of $5 million each from the Gates Foundation and the Packard Foundation to allow the expansion with the organization, the insurer outside of California.
That's amazing. One of the things too, in addition to that, that we just kind of jumped into the interview, but in doing some research and some prep, I want to read off a couple of achievements by you, and I'll I'll read off a couple and then I'll go to the third, which I thought was really great. In 2017, you were named among 125 elite women by Insurance Business America. And then also in 2008, you were named Women of Influence in Silicon Valley by the Silicon Valley Business Journal. But what I think is the coolest is you were named one of the nation's 15 best bosses by Fortune Small Business. And one of my employees said when he was getting me prepped up in here, he said to make sure that I tell you that I was named best boss at our holiday party by all of our employees. So we share that in common.
That
But
sounds great. Yeah, one of the things you mentioned that I think, based on what I've been told, that I'm actually the only woman who's ever founded an insurance company, a property
wow.
insurance company, from the research that we've done. So it's been quite a journey.
Awesome. Well, I want to come back to the mission and the specifics. We work with about 3,000 and growing organizations, and you would be aware more than I am, but about 97% of all nonprofits are under $2 million in revenue. And every day, every week, every month, there are new nonprofits that are started. And my experience has been that there's no shortage of passion, there's no shortage of drive, and there's no shortage of the need in our community for all these wonderful organizations. But the actual know-how amongst all the operational, the finance things, the governance, et cetera, it can be really overwhelming. And my sense is that a lot of individuals out there that are running nonprofits aren't aware of the requirements and the needs and like what is even the purpose. So I'm curious, can you talk through as if you're talking to someone that just founded a brand new nonprofit. Maybe they've been around for a year, they've raised their first 100,000, they have a couple of board members. Why should they get insurance for their organization? And what are the types of insurance that would be critical for them to have?
That's a great question. Let me try to address that. So first of all, I really, having started my own several organizations myself from scratch, I know it's a lot. It's a lot to think about, and everything seems to take money. And so you're constantly saying, well, should I bother to do this sort of governance work, or should I just take the little money that I have and try to use it to benefit my community or the people that I'm trying to serve? So it's a constant juggling act. But what I guess I want to say is that the work that you put into really getting a good grounding as a small nonprofit, as a startup, will pay dividends a long time over the future, because what we see in many of the claim situations is that organizations that didn't, one, understand what the law was or how they should be operating, but they didn't necessarily take the time to train their staff, or their staff didn't have the right kind of oversight, or they didn't do the right sort of documentation. So I just wanted to emphasize, it might feel like when you're starting a nonprofit, "Oh, all this paperwork, why do I have to do it?" And I would just suggest that you're setting a very good grounding for the future of your organization. And so, yes, you have to, get the tax exempt status, and you have to do all the other work and insurance. So the important thing to think about insurance is you might not see the risk in what you're doing, but certainly if someone is injured, that's too late to start thinking about it. So you want to, for good due diligence, you want to have coverage, for example, for your board of directors. And if you don't have employees, you're just an all volunteer, that directors and officers coverage, or we call it board and executive coverage, should be quite inexpensive, because the biggest risk on that board and executive coverage is employment practices. So if you don't have employees, that should be the cost that you should be able to incur, but not that very expensive. Now, you should also, the first coverage you should think about is general liability insurance. That's just the basic slip and falls. So if you're, sometimes I'll talk to nonprofits and they say, well, I don't do anything that would have any risk. And I say, well, do you have any fundraisers? And they'll say, well, yeah, we have fundraisers. Well, do you have people that might slip and fall at those fundraisers? And if so, then you have to have a general liability policy. And typically, you have to have the policy anyway, because you can't rent a venue, or use a space unless you have that general liability policy. So that's a very common. Now, some of the other coverages as you get larger, like if you get computers and other desks and tables and that sort of thing, you're still small, but you have some property, you might want to get some small contents coverage for the even if you don't own the building, you still might want to insure the software or the hardware that you have to operate your organization. Another type of coverage, again, depending on what you do as an organization, if you are working with vulnerable populations and you have professionals as you grow that are working with vulnerable populations, you may want to purchase or may need to purchase what's called social service professional coverage. It's for if you someone gets injured because of a professional lapse that one of your staff did. Or another coverage that is can be expensive, but also is essential if you're working with vulnerable populations. We call it improper sexual conduct and physical abuse coverage. A lot of people know it as sexual abuse and molestation, but that's important to think about. And it has become much more expensive than it used to be because of the changes in what I will say is social inflation. And I can explain that later if you want. If you own vehicles, of course, you need to have insurance for your vehicles. But even if you don't own vehicles and you might have volunteers or employees driving on behalf of your organization, you might want to consider getting something called non owned or hired auto. So that's just a really quick run through of the variety of coverage in there. And that's, I'm talking about property casualty. I'm not talking about workers' comp or life and health. Those are different parts of the industry. Property casualty is what.
Thank you for sharing all that, Pamela. And from my perspective, for any of the nonprofits listening to this and, a part of the Charity Charge Network, the thing that I would highlight and also give the floor to after I make kind of this statement for Pamela to respond to is Nonprofit Insurance Alliance. What's really great about them is they are a nonprofit themselves and they really understand working with nonprofits and are looking out for the best interests. So how does the process look? I mean, if say a nonprofit's listening to this, they go to your website, insurancefornonprofits.org. How long does it take? Are they talking with a real person? What's that
Yes,
process look like?
yes, yes, and yes. So let me talk.
Okay.
So there's a little button on our website that says get a quote. It's get a quote. So let me tell you what that process is. You click on get a quote and we ask you some basic information, where you're located, what the name of your organization is, that sort of thing. So because we're not yet in all 50 states, we hope to be not too distant future, but right now we're in 32. We want to make sure that if we can't help you, we tell you right up front. But what that process does is that we work through insurance brokers, and they're the ones that are more they're gonna sit down with you or work with you over online to fill out an application. We have a group of trusted insurance brokers that we refer even though they're representing the nonprofit, not us. They're not our agents like State Farm agents, but we know that they know about nonprofits, they know the right questions to ask, and they treat you well, not like you're a bother, because I that's what I've heard so many times. "Oh, you're just a small nonprofit. We don't wanna have to deal with you." We make sure that the folks that work with us are not of that type.
I hate over here, I hate that term, small nonprofit.
Yes, right.
They're not small to the people they're serving.
And there
There's
might
no such there's no such thing as a small nonprofit.
they do so much important work, and they do it so often through volunteers. They're adding so much to community, and people sometimes don't recognize the tremendous value that even what's small nonprofit can do for the community, and we recognize that. So again, so we would refer to the broker. The broker would then contact the nonprofit with the information that was given to us. If the nonprofit wants to work through the process, then they would fill out the application and then submit it to us, and that broker would be then their representative as we go through the process. Something to note, as far as I can tell, we're one of one or maybe two insurers that are still that are welcoming to small nonprofits. We have,
Well, that's a good point, right? Because I think about, like, the 990, easy whatever, $50,000 and,
yeah,
kind of organizations. So, yeah, what size does an organization need to be to think about getting their first policy?
and I hate to answer it, it depends, but if you're doing stuff out in the community, you're vulnerable,
Yep.
right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's all I can really say to that is, even if,
Got it, but from an underwriting perspective,
right,
is there a revenue size that's
no,
too small if the organization wants to
no,
pay for a policy?
we have some folks that have 25, $50,000 budget
Right,
and they
and there's a lot of I was about to say little, but it's not. We already already went over that. But no, look, there's such a diversity of nonprofit organizations, right? And I even think about, I have some friends that someone passed away that was dear to them. They have once a year, they have an annual golf fundraiser. Okay. The organization raises
Yeah.
less than $100,000 a year through that one event. Some years it might only be 25,000, 50,000. They donate it to some local nonprofits that, are kind of part of the mission,
Mhm.
but they're out there for a day on a golf course, driving around golf carts, probably having some adult beverages.
Mhm.
Pretty important for them to have an insurance policy.
Absolutely. And what we sometimes find is that people wanna buy just a special events policy for
Mhm.
one day. We offer an annual policy because we kind of figure that you're not really gonna do just that one event. I mean, you've gotta work to put it together, you've gotta do outreach. I mean, there's other things you're doing, and sometimes those special event policies, 1, they only cover 1 day and not all the work up to and after the event, but sometimes the minimum premium can actually be more than the annual policy. So it's just important to check have them check into. But as I said, we are one that does startups also. I was just talking to our marketing folks, and we are seeing a huge uptick in interest on the web to get a quote. He said in the last 4 days, we've gotten 94 inquiries in just the last
Wow.
4 days. I mean, and so you could see that's a lot, and I think there's a lot of demand and a lot of need out there.
An area that I think is really cool, and I want to learn more from you about the Nonprofit Insurance Alliance, is that on the advocacy side. Can you talk a little bit about your work there?
Sure. We have done advocacy in a couple of ways. One, we there was no law in the books, the federal law, to allow us to be a 501(c)(3) nonprofit when we started. And so I actually spent about 7 years lobbying Congress to allow insurers like us to be 501(c)(3) nonprofits. And people have said, well, why would you do that? I mean, and I said, it's because I have seen too many examples of for profits that are start programs that insure nonprofits and then don't act in their best interests. And I felt like the only long-term way would be to have nonprofits, they elect our board, our members elect our board, they serve on the board, they're board members. They control the organization, they govern the organization so that we make sure that we are only here to serve the nonprofit sector. We don't have a secondary profit motivation to shareholders. And that is really different in terms of how we do our work. And so
I appreciate you sharing that. What about also, I mean, I know you've have other
other
resources like well, yeah, we can go down that on that. Let's stay on the advocacy side. I was going to ask you about Blue Avocado and kind of
sure.
the extension of kind of other support that you're offering to nonprofit organizations. But yeah, are there other advocacy things you'd like to mention you're proud
Absolutely,
about?
absolutely, and in fact, there are about 6 or 8 states that my team is working with right now. We get calls we've actually gotten a call from an insurance commissioner, we've got calls from Health and Human Services, people leading Health and Human Services department saying having we're realizing that the laws may need to be changed because nonprofits are being held accountable for things that they are no fault. They're no fault. It's not the fault of the nonprofit. However, they're being held accountable in the justice system for things that they didn't cause. And so we're working regularly with a vast number of states and leaders in states to try to help them craft law that would make it so that nonprofits have to pay when they're at fault, but not have to be responsible when they didn't do anything to cause the harm. There was recently a good law passed in Texas, for example, that our staff drafted a significant portion of it, and we've collaborated with the folks and the nonprofit folks in Texas. So that's a big part of the advocacy that I think a lot of people overlook. We're really the only insurer who is so invested in making sure that the nonprofit sector is insurable that we use our own resources to try to make that possible.
This organization's been around that you started for more than 35 years. Everything from my passion in life and my mission, it's all about helping uplift nonprofits, help them make the world a better place and make their day-to-day lives easier, right? So that they can do their mission, which is what you're doing. And I can see everyone like the pat on the back, right? And the go get them. But what are some stories you might be comfortable sharing? Have there of people that tried to fight you, that tried to block this, that tried to, it's like
Yeah,
because it's incredible, but I gotta imagine that there's
yeah,
the villains out there that try to stand in your way.
yeah. Yes, and I'll try not to name any names, but I can tell you that a large association, when I first was starting in California, and I was trying to raise money for the initial capital and for the work to put the organization together. And I got a call from one of the funders who had been very, very supportive of me. And he said, I just want to tell you there's someone from this organization that is following you to all the funders and telling them not to fund you because they want to create a insurance program with a commercial insurance company and they're going to get revenue off of it. And they don't want you to be making any competition for them if you get off the ground. And this was a large, powerful association for me to be up against when I was really at the very, very beginning. So I also know so that was one. And then after we were in existence for about a year, we had some folks that were working with us to provide some services. And we learned that another insurance company that they were all also working with saw that we could potentially be a threat as we grew. And so that service company actually breached their contract with us and sent us a fax over. It was fax back then because it was before it was computers, saying that they are ceasing doing this key service for us. And basically we could sue them if we wanted to, but they knew very well that we were too small to do that. So we basically had to it was a huge part of our organization, the service they were providing, and we had to scramble to make up for it. So if
Mhm.
there's any consolation, that organization subsequently went out of business and we survived. So you just have to keep persevering.
Good for you. Yeah, never quit. I'm curious too, like stepping aside from specifically the mission of the organization, what's incredible, and you would rarely see this both candidly in the for profit world and the nonprofit world, are how many businesses or nonprofits are around after 5 years of founding, 10 years of founding. And here you are going on 35 years plus.
Mhm.
So I'm curious, what have been some of the things that, as you reflect, and also, I mean, you're in a really unique position because you've seen so many different nonprofit organizations across the years. I'm sure some not do well and others thrive.
Mhm.
What have been some of your learnings? Like if you reflect back, why are you all still here as an organization and growing 35 years later?
Yeah.
You're in such rare air to be able to do that.
Well, I tell you, we do insure a lot of organizations that have been around for 75 years.
Hmm.
That's, I look to them and say, yeah,
Sure.
I'm motivated by you because you've done it for so long. But I would say uh, the thing that really I think has sustained us is going back again to we have a very different motivation. There's been a lot of attempts by others to create like either insurance programs for nonprofits or other companies that weren't exactly nonprofits that were kind of hybrid. And we have a singular mission. And that is what is, I think, allowed us to overcome so many obstacles because we are filling an important niche because the for-profit model comes and goes. They want to write nonprofits, then they don't want to. And I think we've demonstrated over time to nonprofits and to brokers that we really are here for the long run. And that, yeah, a nonprofit might be able to go at certain years and get something that's maybe a little bit cheaper or a little, something, a bell and whistle from some other carrier, but that carrier is going to non-renew them in a couple years if they have a claim. And so, there's a cost to that. And so that's part of it is that we have a really true mission that is recognized out there that we are different. We're not just a commodity because you can't really continue for a long term if you're not doing something that is unique and unusual and serves a particular need. But something else I want to point out is one thing when I first started these organizations, I had not my first job really in the insurance industry was as president and CEO of these organizations. I had never really worked in another organization, organization, and I really hadn't led. I had a natural food store in my past, but I hadn't really led an organization, and so I didn't have a real appreciation of how people who join as employees, as I hired people, how they would adopt my vision and really apply their own passion to the organization. I could see the skeleton of the organizational vision, but I didn't fully appreciate how impactful other people spending many years of their lives helping to build this organization with me would have. I mean, we have employees that have been here for 25 and 30 years. Now, a lot of new employees have come in, which have really enriched us. And, we've had many retire and leave for other reasons. But those people who have been with us for decades have put their blood, sweat, and tears. And I could not have made it without them. And I I try to tell them all the time how much I appreciate everything that they're doing, but it takes more than just working for a salary when you're working for a nonprofit, especially one as unusual as we are. And then we also have the complication that insurance people that work in the insurance industry tend to make a lot of money. And so we're a nonprofit. So we're having to draw from, that very lucrative industry. And yet people come to us and really throw their heart into the work that we do.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing it. I'm learning from you, right? As I ask these questions as well. We are celebrating our 10th year in business
For you.
here at Charity Charge, and we're also a bootstrapped business as well. We're set up as a public benefit corporation. We are a for profit, which we make clear, but everything that we do, it's always been about helping nonprofits and being transparent. And I've already in the past 10 years seen so many venture capital backed startups that are trying to offer some sort of product or service to nonprofits, and they all run out of money, and they were only ever started to make a profit and scale. I mean, that's what
Mhm,
capital, investor capital is meant to do. And so the thing that I'm now say most, which is strong, but very proud of is just having longevity,
mhm.
right? And being able to feel that I can grow this organically and in a responsible way to keep serving more and more organizations as the years go on. So I'm curious with your experience also in the nonprofit industry. Well, two things. One is just a really kind of a tactical thing, but how did you get the word out before the internet? How did you start to get nonprofits to learn about this? And then what did the advent of the internet, how has it changed over time in terms of expanding your, kind of brand awareness and reach and sharing it out?
Those are great questions. So, when I was first starting this organization, I basically just got in the car with a map and drove around to visit brokers. I find the brokers that I thought were insuring nonprofits, and I spent a lot of time. I remember, driving on LA freeways, thinking, what am I doing? And we had so little money that I would try to pack like 5 or 6 or 7 meetings with brokers in LA in one day, and they were not
I've been there. I was in 2019 up. I made the mistake of I had like 5 or 6 meetings, but I didn't have an appreciation for LA traffic. So one was in Santa Monica and one was in Beverly Hills, but one was in downtown LA. And I'm like crisscrossing going, and nothing is more stressful to me than being late for a meeting.
right.
And yeah,
Yeah.
so
So
keep
I
going on, but
Yeah,
I
so I
feel your
did that
pain. I've been
over
there.
and over
Yeah.
again, and then
Yeah.
also, it was a problem. Nonprofit associations, local associations would host meetings, and I would go present to maybe 20 or 30 people. Brokers and nonprofits were both hungry for insurance because they were having lots and lots of trouble finding it. So, but we were definitely an untested organization, and the larger insurance brokers at the time wouldn't work with us. So we really started with the grassroots, the small brokers that were just there helping 2 or 3 or 4 nonprofits in their local community that didn't have any other option, and we were able to help them. So I'm quite, many insurance companies will only work with certain brokers. We are very willing to work not just with small nonprofits, but we also work with small brokers because we recognize that they were central to our early success.
But you had to create really this two-sided marketplace because you had to have brokers on one side, but then on the other side, you had to, have the nonprofits as well.
But we also were an
Wow.
untested market. So municipalities, particularly counties, had certain requirements back then, they still do, but for what they would allow, who they would allow to insure their nonprofits if they were going to give them funding for the work they were doing in their communities. And so I spent a lot of time both in person and on the phone before computers talking with risk managers across the state, because it was California at the time, convincing them that we were um, a viable operation and that they should allow the nonprofits that do work for them to be insured by us. Some of the most
Well,
interesting conversations were they didn't like the fact that we were an alternative. It's called a charitable risk pool. But then after I had further conversations with these folks, I would learn that they were insured as a county by a risk pool too. So
mm,
they understood that it was something that they should be familiar with.
got it. I have so many questions for you, Pamela. Let me go to this one first. What point was it? So you started in the state of California, but obviously you work in 30 plus states now that you had mentioned earlier. At what point was it that you or maybe you and the board realized that it's time to do our work outside of the
Mhm,
state of California? And part of like the context that I asked that is, for example, Charity Charge, we work with nonprofits in all 50 states.
mhm,
And with our model and our partners, it's fairly seamless for us to be able to do that, right? But there are many even English speaking nonprofits outside of the US, whether it's Canada, UK, Australia, other markets. And a lot of people will say to me, "Oh, why don't you?" Or even like years ago, I had all these Canadian nonprofits that reached out and I was, like, sort of seduced by that, like, the entrepreneur in me,
mhm,
but and I think I made the right decision to say, "Hey, there's still so much opportunity
mhm.
here. Let me just stay laser focused on this geography of just, the United States." So, anyway, long ramble on my side, but I'm curious, yeah, when did you decide and why to
Right.
expand beyond just California?
Yeah. Well, mostly it was because associations in nonprofits in a variety of states kept reaching out to us and saying, "When are you gonna help us? We see what you do in
Mhm.
California. We really need this in our state too." And so the problem wasn't limited just to California, but because insurance is a regulated business, we have special law in California that allows us just to operate in California. So the big decision for us was, wow, if we want to insure nonprofits in another state, we have to create an entirely new company. And because of reasons I won't go into, it didn't make sense for us to combine NIAC in California with this other. So we had to have two separate entities. And so I went to my board, I had the discussion. I said, we get asked about this a lot from the other states. And so what I said to them was, give me 2 years. I will investigate this and let me see if I can pull this together in 2 years. And it was just California. And they said, yes, we'd like to help other states as well, but it can't be an unlimited amount of money. And so I raised some money from the Packard Foundation to do a business plan. And then I told the board that it had been such a hold on by your fingernails effort for the first many years for NAC. I didn't want to go through that again with a national expansion. So, because I had borrowed 1.3 million as our only capital for California, that's crazy if you look back now, you're like, oh my gosh, you started an insurance company with a loan. It was a subordinated loan, but it was still bizarre. So I said, I want to raise 10 million in grants. I think that's the only fair thing to do. And if I don't raise it by this certain date, then I don't think we should do it because I don't want to jeopardize the California organization by stretching in a way that could jeopardize that. And so turns out I ended up getting 5 million from the Gates Foundation and 5 million ultimately from the Packard Foundation, and it was a real squeaker. We actually got the word from Packard almost exactly on the 2 year mark. So, but I had the really distinct pleasure of working with the Gates Foundation just when it was starting up, and so Bill Gates's dad was the person that I got to work with on this, and he was quite gracious.
Wow. Talk to us about, you've mentioned risk pool.
Mhm.
Can you explain to us,
Sure.
hopefully somewhat in,
English?
if you're explaining it to a kindergarten, a 5-year-old, or maybe you'd consider me that, and that's fine too. How does it work? What does
Yeah.
that mean?
So in California, there's a state law that allows nonprofits to pool together. This was in response to the fact they couldn't find coverage from commercial carriers. to pull together and create what's is called a risk pool. And that means that 501(c)(3) nonprofits can pool together. They have to have a certain amount of capital, which is even less than I raised, and then we can jointly insure. But to the outside, many of the folks, it looks like an insurance company, but it is organized differently. But we do also purchase reinsurers, for example, from global insurance companies, just like an insurance company would do, so that we take risk up to a certain amount. And then beyond that, we pay other insurance companies called reinsurers to pay for the larger claims. And so the California company is a risk pool. The outside of California company, Alliance of Nonprofits for Insurance, is technically a risk retention group. It is licensed and admitted in the state of Vermont, and it's regulated as an insurance company in the state of Vermont. So, very different types of regulatory structures. We also have another organization that's also a 501(c)(3) that had to be created when we moved outside of California, and it has all of the staff. So we have staff and technology assets in what's called Alliance Member Services, but it is very much behind the scenes and it services on a cost basis the other two insurance pools.
Awesome. That's a really cool model. It's amazing. Pamela, I'm curious, explain some of the specifics about leading this organization for 35 plus years, right? And how you got started versus, how the world has changed today. I'm curious overall, the general nonprofit sector, what are some of from my standpoint, all things seem to be cyclical, right? With the economy and patterns get repeated, right? So it seems from my perspective that there's a lot of the blocking and tackling, regardless of the mission of the organization. There's a lot of best practices and things. What have you seen that has been tried and true and proven kind of, and I'm saying in this as advice, what you've seen of over the years, of running this, whether the decades have changed, what has remained constant to operate and run a successful nonprofit?
Really great question. Let me think this through. So, first of all, I think you should disabuse yourself that it will ever be easy. I mean, I think that you have to really be in here for the long haul and know that every year will have its challenges, some much more challenging than the next, but it never gets to a point where, wow, this is on automatic pilot. Because as you said, things are cyclical, the outside world changes. From our perspective, probably last year was our most difficult year in 35. And you think, oh, $1 billion in assets, how could that be? Well, two things: the changes in the civil justice system, which I brought up, which all these claims that are costing more than what we had anticipated from prior years. But also, we had to change to a brand new software system and highly, highly complex. This industry is highly, highly complex. And that was very challenging. So I would say never assume that it's going to get easy. I would also say for nonprofits, it's really important that we hold ourselves to the highest standards. We're a different world. We operate in different ways than the for profit world. And it's important for us to not lose sight of our mission. The organizations, the nonprofits that we see probably are the riskiest is the ones where they have blurred the lines between whether it's their organization or it's a community based organization that belongs to the public. And when I see organizations that are operating like the executive director or is operating as though it's my organization, this is mine and I get to do with what I want and it's not accountable to a board, those are the ones that we see have the worst claims because they're not really thinking about the best interests of the community and they can cut corners to try to grow or to be more profitable or, do more in their community, but not in a way that's sustainable. And that gets into more risky operations. So I would say really keeping the focus of the mission always at the forefront and as the leader, I would say my challenge is always as because we have about 200 staff and we've hired a lot of new staff with the growth that we've had. And it's making sure that you infuse everybody in the organization with an understanding of why you're here and what you're doing and the people and the organizations that you're serving. Because if you lose sight of that and the people that are working in the more junior roles don't understand that sense of mission. I mean, they're the front of the organization. It's not me. I mean, they are the ones that people are talking with on a day to day basis. And they need to really understand why they're doing what they do.
That's awesome advice. I really appreciate you sharing that. What does the future look like for the organization, and where do you imagine the organization in in 35 years from now?
Well, given the state of the world in our country, it's really hard to look out 35 years. I mean, I'm one of the things that we did decades ago was divest in fossil fuels, for example. Because we wish that the rest of the insurance industry would do that because they could have a huge impact on the overall climate. So we care not just about the insurance business, but we care about our overall community and the health of our planet. And so, I think with the way the insurance industry generally is going, it's going to become, for property insurance at least, the insurance carriers are going to be able to insure less and less and less, and it's going to be a food fight over, the few risks that are left. And certainly nonprofits, I don't think are going to be at the most desirable in the property because they tend not to do their business in the newest and most up to date buildings. So I think property is going to be a challenge. Liability, in terms of our growth, we are poised to be able to move into all 50 states with this new technology upgrade. So I see us moving with liability into additional states so that we are, if not fully 50 states, very close to 50 states. I think the need will continue to be there. One of the trends that has been really troubling lately that I think might drive some of the future growth is that we had a foundation are not difficult to insure, right? We tend to insure organizations of all types, but the ones that need us the most are the ones that are serving children and the elderly and that sort of thing.
Thank you for sharing that. I really do appreciate it. I wanted to, before we wrap up this episode, there's one other area that I found and I've been aware of for a while that I believe you all created, which is blue avocado. Can you talk to us about
Sure.
why you're doing that and the purpose of blue avocado?
Another great question. So, Blue Avocado started, there was as just a vehicle to try to give straight talk to nonprofits, to be a publication that was by and for nonprofits.
Which I want to plug is just simply blueavocado.org.
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Blueavocado.org. And it's free. It's an online free magazine. We manage it. We are the publishers and the editors of it. And we don't really what we do it for is to give a voice to the nonprofits. I think that very often experts, and I'm using air quotes here, talk down to nonprofits and they are constantly saying, oh, if you just did this or if you just did that. We wanted to have a platform where people who are actually doing the hard work in the field and know what these challenges are really like are able to provide the benefit of their own experience to other nonprofits and make it in a form that is readable and real life so that we can learn. It's peer learning, so we can learn from our peers. And so that's what Blue Avocado is. We try to make the topics relevant and again, not talking down to nonprofits. That's a conversation I have even when we do risk management bulletins is they're doing the hard work. Don't assume that you understand exactly the challenges that they have and try to tell them this is exactly how you should be doing stuff. Let's raise the issues and let's try to get them information that is actually actionable and helpful for them.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for creating Blue Avocado. And also thank you for creating the Nonprofit Insurance Alliance, which I want to just put out again is insurancefornonprofits.org. And you can just simply go to the website, click the green button in the top right hand corner, get a quote. I can't encourage enough any nonprofit listener to this or a board member to check them out. Super cool resource. And it's a wonderful organization. Pamela, thank you so much for being on this episode. I greatly appreciate your time, passion, and you really are an inspiration to me. So thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thanks for what you're doing. It's a valuable service and really appreciate you. Thanks for giving me the time to talk today.
My pleasure. And to close it out, thank you again for everyone who listens to the Charity Charge Show. We appreciate it.